listening to the Pursuing Alpha podcast, hosted by Charles Brandon Snyder.
Rob, I appreciate you being on, man. I'm excited to have you here on Alpha Capital, and
it's
also
my pleasure.
Pursuing Alpha. You're the first attorney we have on, so this is exciting. So take a few seconds to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your practice.
Yeah, I'm Rob Hogan. I'm an attorney here in West Texas, also licensed in Colorado and the state of New Mexico. Licensed all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. I've had one case at the Supreme Court that we can talk at here in a little bit.
Oh, I'd love to do that.
I'm a graduate of Texas Tech University, twice over. The first time around wasn't good enough, so I went back and got my law degree at Tech too.
Oh, wow.
And I've been practicing here in West Texas for, about 25 years now.
So you're not a rookie then? That's what you're saying.
That's right. That's right.
That's good. That's good. Man, you're going to have to tell me, you actually went in front of the Supreme Court and actually negotiated a case?
Well, in front of is kind of fuzzy logic.
So it's not like the movies.
Right. I did have a case that went to the Supreme Court, but we didn't get to go argue. They summarily dismissed us from the Supreme Court. So we got to do all of the briefs, got to have a little bit of the mystique of going in front of the Supreme Court. I've got a nice certificate hanging on my wall that says United States Supreme Court. But other than that, I'm not like rubbing elbows with Clarence Thomas or anything like that.
That would have been cool, though.
Oh, it would have.
Yeah, that would have been. What was the case? So you dove into it, so we just got to hit it out of the gate.
Okay. It was a case about 2015 or so, police liability case. That's some of what I do. There was a guy who was driving on a Sunday night, driving up in Tulia, Texas. The police had been looking for him. They had what's called a blue warrant on him. They had a warrant for his arrest because he hadn't paid his probation fees and hadn't turned in his community service hours. So a police officer gets in behind him, tries to arrest him at a local restaurant there. He takes off, heads north on the interstate, rural interstate, dark of night, Sunday night, no traffic around. The guy heads north on the interstate, and as he's headed north, the DPS is pursuing him, the Department of Public Safety. They're in behind him, pursuing him, trying to stop him. They put out spikes underneath an overpass, and one trooper gets on top of the overpass, drives out on top of the overpass, stops his car on top of the overpass, takes out his AR-15, takes up a defensive position behind the guardrail on the overpass. And as the guy is driving up, before he can even get to the spikes to let the spikes work, boom, 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 boom.
No way.
Shoots the guy through the windshield of the car. He had asked for permission to use deadly force to terminate this pursuit, and the order had come down from the sergeant. No. Let the spikes work. Deadly force is not authorized. And he went ahead and did it anyway. He claimed later that he was only shooting at the engine block of the car, he missed. And when he missed so dramatically that he put 6 shots right into a 3-inch grouping in the middle of the windshield. That's a hell of a miss.
And so perfect of a miss.
Perfect. And police liability cases are notoriously hard.
Very hard. My dad was caught for 30 years. I mean, that blue shield exists. And,
it does.
And I'm a big fan of it. So I got to tell you, my dad as police chief, I think it should exist. But those extreme cases when it's gross negligence like that, I think it should be prosecuted. So.
And the trooper.
Please tell me he was prosecuted.
No. He was not prosecuted.
He would be in today's time.
No, I don't think so. They couldn't.
Really?
They couldn't prosecute him. And the DPS has not changed, and I'll tell you more about that. But the trooper afterwards, he had some disciplinary problems. He had been counseled by his higher ups for not being proactive enough in writing citations and making arrests, and so he unloads his AR-15 after the shooting and walks up to his sergeant and laughs and says, "How's that for proactive?"
Oh, no way.
After he's just executed this guy. So I represented the 5-year-old and 7-year-old children of the guy who had died. And we brought this case brought it under a section of the law called 1983, Civil Rights Law, after 42 United States Code Section 1983, that provides for an action against anyone who, under color of federal law or state law, deprives someone of their constitutionally protected interests. And so that whole body of law is called 1983 law. So we brought the case under 1983, filed it against the trooper and against the Department of Public Safety. The case gets filed in federal court. We filed it in the federal court up in Amarillo. And Judge Mary Lou Robinson was on the bench in Amarillo at the time. Great, great lady. She was a Carter appointee. And this is 2015 we're talking about.
Sure.
But she was a Carter appointee. Shows how long she had been there.
Right.
And before that, she had been a state judge, and she had been a law professor. And she graduated law school from the University of Texas and was a classmate of Moses at the University of Texas.
Well, it's the fact that it was UT too, so it wasn't that great, but I digress.
So we brought this case in front of the judge in Amarillo, Texas. That's where things from that area that's south of Amarillo go to. And had several hearings in front of the judge. The DPS invoked qualified immunity. They filed a motion to dismiss. That was denied. They filed a summary judgment motion after discovery. And the judge denied that too, which was remarkable because that's one of the first thing that happens, especially in a conservative environment, a conservative jurisdiction, is the judge customarily will grant summary judgment. And they grant the summary judgment if the plaintiff has not met their standards in the absence of something egregious. It's a really high bar to overcome in a police liability case. So in the absence of something egregious, summary judgment will be granted. The case does not get to go to trial. Nothing more happens with it. So summary judgment was denied. Judge Robinson was offended at what the officer had done and felt that the officer had acted outside all bounds of decency and reason. So it goes up to the Fifth Circuit then. The DPS and the trooper file an appeal, and they can take an immediate appeal of that to the Fifth Circuit. So we go down and argue it at the Fifth Circuit.
Where's that at?
In New Orleans.
Okay.
Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans. I've been there 5 or 6 or 7 times. We get a very good panel for us, very active panel at the Fifth Circuit, and they do not overturn what Judge Robinson has done. They say, no, they're upset at what the DPS has done too, and what the trooper did, and that the trooper violated the civil rights of the man who died. So the DPS then, their next level that they can appeal to is the en banc court. So the Fifth Circuit has 15 judges on the Fifth Circuit that sit on the entire court. And they've got, they hear cases in 3-judge panels. So when you have a case at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, you don't get all 15 judges.
You get 3 of them.
You get 3.
Okay.
And it's just the luck of the draw. You get a random panel that it's assigned to. And you do all of your research. You try to learn as much about the judges as you can, figure out what they're going to be interested in, how to answer their questions that they're going to have about the case. So we argued it in front of the 3-judge panel. The DPS invoked the en banc court, asked for a review by the en banc court. The en banc court, all 15 judges reviewed it. They denied en banc review.
Denied it to you or denied it to
Denied it to the DPS.
Okay.
Which validates what the panel has done.
Okay.
And then the panel comes back and redrafts their opinion, which they can do. And they changed a little bit of the nuances of the opinion, but it still stood. So we survived the district judge in Amarillo. We survived the Court of Appeals, the panel. We survived the en banc review at the Fifth Circuit. And the Fifth Circuit is notoriously one of the most conservative when it comes to police liability cases. The Fifth Circuit will almost always go on the part of the police and rule in favor of the police officers. So we survived all of that. The DPS filed to take it up to the United States Supreme Court. And then the music starts, the scary music, the footsteps, the violins start to play, because there is this entire orchestra that comes when you go to the United States Supreme Court. It's not just like going to the Fifth Circuit.
So, but if you won all these, you didn't win. You still have to take it to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Or did they appeal it again?
They appealed it again.
Okay, it's to take it to the Supreme.
To take it to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
They petitioned for review.
So who's appealing?
To the Supreme Court.
The attorneys of the state of Texas for the DPS.
Correct. For the DPS and the trooper. It was the Texas the Attorney General's office, Civil Division, and so they're taking it up to the Supreme Court. We start getting phone calls from people that we have never even heard of, law professors, lawyers with big multi-state and multinational law firms that are the token, and I say token, many of these law firms have someone who has been on law review, who is very well written, who's a very scholarly person, that they will devote to handling cases of public interest. And that increases the law firm's prestige. It's a way to get back to the community.
Yeah.
Sure. And so we start getting calls from all of those people, from former Supreme Court clerks. Hey, can we ghostwrite your briefs for you? Can we help you with your case? We'd like to get involved with your case. And suddenly, we feel like we're a pretty hot commodity, like we've just suddenly walked into a bar and there's a whole bunch of people looking at us, all wanting to date us.
Yeah, that's a unique feeling.
It was. So we settled on one particular individual to help us, guide us through the process, and he had done lots of Supreme Court briefs before. And we briefed the case fully to the U.S. Supreme Court. Had to deal with the publishers, because at that point you have to have your brief professionally typeset and professionally published by a publishing company in the D.C. area, and they've got to do.
Sounds like a lot of
bureaucracy
at that point in time.
It is. There's a lot of moving parts, and so we got our briefs filed, went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court granted the petition. It's called a petition for discretionary review. At that point, the Supreme Court has three real options. They can deny the petition for review, and if they deny the petition for review, that means that they are not, the case is not deemed important enough for them to review, or that the lower court did nothing wrong, and they deny the request for review, and the lower court ruling stands. The
Gotcha.
Court of Appeals ruling stands. Because at the Supreme Court level, it's not a mandatory appeal, it's a discretionary appeal. That means that the court has to agree to hear it.
Yeah,
it's got to be an important issue.
I thought all of them had to agree to hear it.
No.
In the Supreme Court.
The Court of Appeals, it's mandatory. The Court of Appeals must hear it if somebody appeals.
Okay.
But the Supreme Court, it's discretionary.
Yeah, I thought all Supreme Court, though, was discretionary. Like, they very rarely pick up cases.
Right. And of the cases that are filed in any given year with the Supreme Court, they only hear 2%.
That's crazy.
So
I did not know that statistic.
Yeah, so that's one option they've got. They have.
So if they don't hear it, they
they
push it back to whatever the ruling was from the appellate court or the Fifth Circuit. Then, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And in that case, had they pushed ours back, had they denied review, then we would have proceeded to have a trial in our case to establish liability and damages. So the Supreme Court can deny the petition for discretionary review. They can grant the petition for review and ask for full briefing on the merits. That's when you go up. You have time to argue the briefs in front of the full U.S. Supreme Court, answer questions from the judges and Justice Roberts or Justice Thomas or any Justice Kagan.
This is what's on C-SPAN.
Yeah, that's what everybody likes to see. That's the magic.
Yeah.
Or they can do like they did in this case, and they can grant the petition, but then summarily reverse the case. So they said, yes, we will review it. And by the way, we don't need any additional briefing. We don't need any argument, because we're going to hold that the trooper did nothing wrong.
That's crazy.
That
it was just slam dunk. It's over. That's it.
Slam dunk, spike the ball in the end zone. It's over. You're done. You're out of here.
That's done. That's crazy.
Yeah. And one of the worst things about it is it set a little bit of negative precedent, and it made future cases a little bit harder to bring. So,
see, and this is so I want to unwind a little bit. I love coming out of the gates hot, and I think you did a great job on that. And that's such an interesting. I want to come back to that case for a few seconds, but I want to just to give context. What do you do? I want to preference this before I say it. Like there in my world, when I got into the business of being a financial planner, I thought all attorneys were the same. I mean, that's what you're taught. You grow up and you're like, hey, go hire an attorney. They don't tell you to hire what type of attorney, right? And so being in the business I've been attorneys are kind of like doctors, right? You don't go to a brain surgeon to have your ankle or your knee replaced or your hip replaced, right? It's all y'all have a specialty. There's generalists. I get it. There's generalist attorneys that kind of do a little everything, right? I would say those guys are the ones that I'm like, right? Because they're good, but they're not great at everything. Right. It's impossible. Like I'm not a financial planner that I'm an expert in split dollar arrangements and DB plans, right? I go find a partner that is an expert in those fields, right? Same thing for attorney, right? So I want to preference that because I think a lot of the listeners, a lot of business owners that I visit with have that same theory or that same thought. Oh, I got an attorney. And I go, okay, cool. Is he a probate attorney? No, he just drafted some of our legal documents for us and, to create our entity here, or they filed this lawsuit or on this employee. And I'm going, really? But are they a specialist in knowing the different types of CRATs and different types of legacy planning that's out there? And he goes, I don't know. And I go visit with them, and 9 times out of 10, they're not a specialist in that. You're right. I know more than they do inside of it. Just because they know the law, it doesn't mean they're specialists. So that being said, it sounds like you've had a 25-year career, and it's an amazing career, but what do you specialize in?
So I specialize in personal injury trial law.
Wow.
And we can talk a little bit more about what that entails, but I do have to tell you, for attorneys, the term specialist has a very
different connotation
and a different connotation.
Yeah.
It's not you ask somebody what you specialize in, and I don't think it's the same in your career field. You can kind of choose what you say. This is our focus. This is our primary.
That's a good word for it.
Area of interest. But with attorneys, if an attorney is going to say they're a specialist, and if I tell someone, hey, you need to go consult a specialist in this, it's much the same as it is for doctors. In order for an attorney to be a specialist, you've got to document to a regulatory board that you have a certain amount of involvement, continuous involvement in that area. For my specialty, I had to document that I had tried so many cases, that a certain amount of my percentage was devoted to personal injury trial law, that I had taken an exam. You have to take a qualifying exam in order to be a personal injury trial specialist, or any specialist in Texas at least. As an attorney, you have to take a board certification exam, and then every 5 years you have to recertify as a specialist in that area. So for someone to be able to say that they're a specialist in a particular field of law, that's meaningful.
I'm sure.
That encompasses a very definite quality or a very definite skill, and it's regulated. Not everybody can say that they are a specialist. On the other hand, there's for many practices, doctors, attorneys, probably financial planners, there are companies that will sell you a nice little crystal plaque for about $500 that says that you're the most appreciated, most experienced financial planner in Manitoba.
I literally got 2 emails this week that says, "Hey, Brandon, we want to notify you that you've been nominated to be the top 5 financial planners in your area, and pay this money, and you get in this magazine, you do all these things." And I'm like, and it's like delete. It happens a lot, right? But there's
shady.
It is shady, right? It's just a marketing ploy is all it is.
It is.
But there is things in art, like a CFP is a legitimate, a SEMA, a CFA. And I will tell you, out of all the designations that we have in our industry, a CFA has got to be the most impressive one. So it's a chartered financial analyst, and we have one of those guys on our staff, and he has pictures of him. He's about 6 foot tall. and he's standing with his arm on his books, and that's 1 year's worth of deal. He takes a test. It's a pass or fail test, and then he's got to do it 2 more years. Same thing, where he's standing on this. And so a chartered financial analyst is probably the highest criteria you can have to analyze in the markets. And then we have Dr. Starr, which he has a PhD in economics. You put an economist with an analyst together, that's a CFA. That's pretty good secret sauce that you have. So we have a great team. I'm very blessed to be in there. But I get your point, right? So to be a specialist in your industry, you actually have to be credited at some deal in there. So the trial law inside of there is what you've done. Did a Supreme Court case. And so this touches home with me to a little bit. And so I'm going to divulge a couple of things. And so my dad was passed in March, amazing man.
Sorry.
And so if there's one thing I could say is that if I get to live up to the integrity and the passion that man had in his 67 years of being on this earth, I would be doing really well in this world. So he was a police chief for 23 years at TSTI that turned into TSTC in Amarillo.
Okay.
Ended up being fired, almost killed, and then when you were fired as a police chief, that's that blue wall right there. You're not getting another job. So he spent 18 months, no job. Shallowater PD took a risk on him and then turned around and hired him there. And he spent the last 4 years before he got really, really sick with MS and all that stuff in there. What he got fired for was he discovered the largest embezzling scheme in the United States history within a state agency.
Wow.
The CFO comes to him one day and says, "Hey, David, there's some irregularities in the accounting processes inside the college." And David goes, "Okay, let me take a look at it. Give me the information." So he gets the information. He figures out, well, in the state of Texas, there's a thing called surplus property. And so whenever a state agency goes out there and goes and gets airplane engines or desk or copper pipe or something like that to run the state, they will buy it in bulk for bulk discounts. But they might only use 70% of it or 80% of it or 90% of it. Whatever's left over, they're buying full market value. They give it to state entities at usually 10 cents on the dollar.
Right.
And so what they did is the president of the college at the time and some other guys, there was a trucking company, a part of the state institution, Texas State Technical Institution. So it was a educational campus that used to be an Air Force base, and one of the educational things they did was a truck driving school. And so inside that school, they figured out that they could buy surplus property on 10 cents on the dollar, throw it into the warehouses there, because it's an old airport. They had these massive warehouses that weren't being used. They would package it all up, put it onto trucks, haul it here in Lubbock, Texas, put it into an option, make 60 cents on the dollar, and keep the spread.
Wow.
And they stopped counting at like hundreds of millions of dollars over the course of 10 or 15 years. And so my dad starts investigating it. Well, when he's investigating it, he's going into these warehouses and he's finding these things. It gets back to the administration of the college. He gets visits from the president and the chancellor and some other people and some state officials going, "Hey, David, why don't we leave this alone? Let's just kind of keep looking the other way here."
Right.
Dad says, "No, we're not going to look the other line." And then so they try to kill him. And they try to do a couple other things, and they eventually fire him when he was supposed to be in court that day. He shows up for court. My dad said the biggest mistake he ever made was he should have listened to him and not showed up at court, because they would have automatically been in jail for preventing him from going to court, because he had to testify as a police officer on another case inside of there. But they fire him. He gets blackballed where he can't find a job. I'm always indebted to Shallowater and the administration there to hire him as a police chief, and he grows Shallowater as police department, retires 4 or 5 years later with Meniere's disease, which was an onset of stress and everything that's going on there, and then develops MS, and then 20 years later he passes away from MS and COVID.
Wow.
And so that's his story inside of it. A lot of things in between that. Became a very successful business owner, but he sues the state of Texas, and the largest lawsuit ever against a state agency in U.S. history. They changed the punitive damages laws against the state agency because of my dad's case. And so it goes to appeals. And the attorney at the time does not, I think he phones it in to a certain degree, But they later out, they told Dad, and I was probably 11 at the time, and my dad explained it to me multiple times over the years. They called it judicial abuse of power. And so whenever a judge overrules a hearing, but knocks the verdict down he knocked it down like 92%. It's like unprecedented inside of there. Yeah. And so so my dad was very sick. He took the plea, which pretty much covered his pension that he lost, because he lost his pension when he was fired. And he rebuilt it all back up. It's a great story. I wish they would have wrote. He had offers to do the books, and he had offers to do the movies. And this is, back then, going forward, this is when Aaron Brockovich came out. Mm-hmm. I really wish he would have pursued that, because it would have just been a great thing to be able to document my dad's story inside of there. And I think one day, hopefully, we'll be able to document it. So I still have in my office, in a closet full of boxes of everything from the actual trial. So I got it all from Kevin. I got it all from my dad, and some audio tapes that were very interesting from a couple of political parties and things that were happening. Because you got to remember, right around that time, there was a governor from Texas, two governors from Texas, one exiting, one coming in, that was fixing to be president of the United States back in the late 90s. Right. So there's a lot of information that comes there. So there's a couple of cool stories on there. So I have I say that saying I have a sensitivity when it comes into trial lawyers, but also in personal injury lawyers. And I think that takes us to the subject that we can cover today from a financial standpoint, is there's things in what you do that I think the public, if they would have known how to document things going forward, they would understand better. And we still got we got a winning. We got cash. My family got cash at the end of the day from that. It was pretty much equal to my dad's pension, but we got cash. My dad did not understand how to manage that money. Yeah. And you can imagine how many people, and I remember dozens of people just walking up to our house, and we lived out in the country, out a mile away from the city of Shallowater, Texas. And people would literally knock on the door and say, "Hey, I got a business proposal for you. I got, this opportunity." And then some of his closest friends that he was around was like, "Hey, David, I need to borrow money." So it hits you left and right from every aspect and every angle. And it comes to that point where I think you need a intermediary to make sure that you're protecting yourself, but you're keeping your reputation. And that's what it comes down to. So what would you give people that are going through how to identify an opportunity where, if you feel like they're being taken advantage of, when to contact an attorney? And two, if an award is given, how to manage that correctly? How do you set them up for success?
Yeah, big topic. A couple of big topics. But you encapsulate so well what the field of personal injury is about. And fundamentally, I like to think of myself as a champion for justice, a helper of the oppressed, a cheerleader for the little guy. So in order to know what to look for, there's really a very broad field of personal injury law. Part of it involves, like you mentioned, things like employment discrimination, retaliatory action by an employer. Part of it is actual injury, whether it's an on-the-job injury or whether it's some type of a recreational injury or an automobile or truck wreck, things like that, medical malpractice. Any time that something unexpected happens that causes you to have some sort of a physical loss, a financial loss, medical bills, loss of property, anything like that, may be the topic of a personal injury case. So when should you contact an attorney in a case like that? Probably yesterday. Whenever you're asking that question, it's probably means that it's time that you should be taking those steps.
At least having a conversation. And so here's a prime example. So and I'm not bring. I think that people hear analogies the best when they try to understand it. So when you're talking through insurance companies and when you're talking about directly with an employer, so that's the ones where I get the most foggy on. So like a car accident, like Kyla was in a T-bone. I'm surprised that kid walked away and she didn't walk away. 3 months later, she had a torn meniscus, and she ended up, and we looked at her stats. She went all the way state for that, but did not play great at state. And we think there was a bearing on the fact that she couldn't put weight on her knee, and she just didn't know it. She was playing through the pain, and which we had a conversation with her about, like, why she would say, Dad, it hurt, but it was like, I didn't know if I was sore, if it just hurt, right? And now she going to college, and she's like, she can't walk. And so we got the MRI, found out she's had a torn meniscus, and they've seen that meniscus has been torn for 6 months. And I'm a little irritated on Covenant because they knew it was an impact injury, and they didn't run an MRI at the time. But they did it on the other knee, but they didn't do it on the impact knee because she had a scratch on her right knee, which is from the gear shift, but the left knee was T-boned. And I'm like, if you ran it on one, why didn't you run it on the other? I digress. But to your point, insurance companies are now involved. It's a delayed injury, or we didn't recognize the injury for like 3 months.
Right.
And so now we're in that kind of weird area. Like, okay, now we're questioning whether the insurance companies are going to cover this, right? So where are you out 10 grand in just MRIs and medical bills and all this other stuff inside of it? On top of that, now we're going to have to come back. She's going to have full surgery during Christmas break here and all these things that go on. So I made a mistake and a wrong decision by not contacting an attorney early on. So how could I have rectified or made that better?
Well, and I've got a great story that illustrates that. One of the most interesting case, I've got a lot of interesting cases, but one interesting case that I worked on was a case where a Watson Cisco food truck driver hit a guy on a motorcycle out here at Spur 327 in Iola, very close to where your office is. We got involved in that case, and the man lived. The man on the motorcycle lived. Thank God for that. But we got involved in that case almost immediately after it happened. And many times people will wait, they'll delay, either if it's not a catastrophic injury, they'll want to kind of use the wait and see approach. Maybe the insurance company will do the right thing. If it is a catastrophic injury, oftentimes they're busy with funeral arrangements, they're busy with grieving and things that go on in life. But oftentimes people will wait to even consider seeking an attorney on a case, and the longer that you wait, the more opportunities you miss. So this motorcycle case with Watson Cisco, we got hired on very early on. We were able to go get a temporary restraining order. We filed the case in court immediately because we recognized how serious it was. We were able to get a temporary restraining order against Watson Cisco so that we could get access to the truck, so that we could go look at the truck, which was still in impound, in police impound, where they had taken it right after the wreck. We got to go look at the truck before they did, before Watson Cisco got to it. And when we got to the truck, big 18-wheeler was driving early in the morning. When we got to the truck, we found sitting on the seat right below the gear shift, there was a styrofoam plate with an English muffin and some scrambled eggs and a sausage patty on it. There was an open Dr. Pepper in the cup holder. And we later figured out in the case that this Watson Cisco driver had been delivering to some of the hotels out in that area. And one of the hotels had a free continental breakfast. And they said, hey, come on, go get you some food. And so he got a plate of breakfast, and he was driving an 18-wheeler in 7:30 a.m. busy traffic in Lubbock, Texas, a city of 300,000, while he was eating breakfast, driving with his knees,
right,
and ran over a motorcycle. So that, being able to find that, was crucial in the case. And if we hadn't gotten hired immediately on that case, if we had gotten hired 6 months down the road or 3 months down the road, Watson Cisco would have already had access to that vehicle. And we'll never know for sure what would have happened, but I'll tell you there's a suspicion in a lot of cases like that. There's a natural kind of a tendency to clean up the vehicle, to clean up hide the evidence, if you will. Not saying that that's what would have happened in this case, but you always wonder about things like that. The point is that we would not have been able to have preserved that evidence.
Sure.
And so, particularly in a catastrophic case, preservation of evidence is one of the keys. So that means that you need to find an attorney, you need to hire an attorney immediately, and you need to hire the right attorney. We have a system in Texas now, unfortunately, where people who experience a death, people who experience a serious accident, will start getting calls immediately from attorneys. That's illegal. That's case running. That's barratry. It's against the law in Texas, but it happens. And not enough is done to enforce it in Texas. There are unfortunately lots of my attorney brethren that will run cases, that will chase cases, the ambulance chasers like you talked about, that will unethically go solicit people, and that's not right. But those are not the right attorneys to get. That's not the right way to go about finding an attorney. So it's important to find
on a personal
the
injury.
right
It sounds
attorney
like
quickly.
that you need to look for that certification that you have inside of there to actually know you're a specialist inside of trial law for
Absolutely.
personal injury. And that's one barrier to entry I would think that you need to consider.
That's right.
Okay. Inside of there. So let's say that they go hire a good attorney and they hire one like you or somebody that's in your field that is a specialist inside of there. What do you see? Because I always look at it from the most impactful thing wasn't the actual case it said with my dad. The most impactful thing that we had was the year after. And I've now counseled probably a half a dozen windfall events with clients where they've had a death or a windfall of just, had a conversation with one on an NIL deal. That was a multi-million-dollar NIL deal. Also, awarded a lawsuit one inside of there. It was a $26 million lawsuit on I think we talked about this months back on a guardianship case inside of there. So all the ones that had a common denominator, including my dad's case, is nobody knows what to do. They're either they're in the state of, okay, I'm grieving still, or I just got past my grieving and now I've had that book closed. And now I'm in this new experience of trying to understand how to manage money to a degree that I've never had that kind of money. And now everybody's coming after me. Right.
And I'm going to argue with your terminology just a little bit. I don't like the term windfall.
Really? That's literally in our industry. That's how we call it.
Yeah, and that's not, to me, in the legal industry, that's not an accurate term, and that's kind of almost a trigger word, because in the legal industry, one of the negative things that's said about attorneys or lawsuits often is that they're like winning the lottery, or it's like jackpot justice. And we try to get away from those types of unfavorable stereotypes.
I could see that.
Those unfavorable looking.
Yeah, because it wasn't a windfall for my dad.
That's right. He didn't want that to happen.
No, yeah.
And he would have rather been able to work out his years around ethical, honest people that would have treated him right and not defrauded the taxpayers of the state of Texas. And
sure. So what would you call that? Because we call it a windfall when it's like NIL deals, lottery winners, right? Things like that. That legacy, inheritance that wasn't unexpected. Those are kind of in our classification that we hate. But in y'all's world, it's almost like making somebody whole.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Is that, and so it's a little different there. But there's a lot of things that I think not only from managing it, but there's tax implications that we didn't understand at the time.
Right.
And that is a huge, huge things that a lot of people don't consider inside of it.
So let's talk about that a little bit. In Texas, any personal injury recovery, if it's because of accident or sickness or illness, it's not taxable. There's no income tax on it.
Except for punitive damages, right?
Except for punitive damages. And set that aside for just a second. So the recovery, the actual damages, whether it's classified as medical expenses or impairment, which is the inability to do things, Okay, if you can't work around the house any longer, you can't walk a certain distance, you can't sit for more than 20 minutes without having great stiffness and great difficulty. That's all impairment. Lost wages, even disfigurement, which is scarring. All of those things are not taxable because they fall under an exception to income tax rules. They're not considered income.
Sure.
It's a recovery of human capital.
Okay.
So it's like your house gets blown down by a tornado, and you get a check from the insurance company that represents the value of your house. That's not income. You didn't do any work for that. That was a trade. You traded your house for the cash value of your house, right?
Right.
So it's similar to that. You're trading your health, you're trading your physical ability, you're trading your range of motion for an equivalent cash value. Okay, so that's the trade-off. It's not taxable. Now, punitive damages are considered to be taxable. Recovery in cases like your dad's is considered to be taxable because it's an employment law case. That's taxable. It's not because of physical sickness or injury. So it doesn't fall under that human capital exception. So those things are taxable.
So you have to look at that. And a lot of the courts now, from what I've read and seen here lately, are changing. The judge is actually changing these where it's not lump sum payouts anymore. They're actually forcing some type of settlement that is actually paid out over time, or requesting an annuity, some type of payout structure inside of there. Have you seen that?
I have not.
We have a guy in New Mexico that specializes in that.
Okay. Now, you mentioned New Mexico, and that differs from state to state. So in Texas, there is no facility right now to do that. I've heard some proposals to do something like that. But there is in New Mexico, and that specifically in New Mexico relates to future medical expenses.
Yes, that's the big key right there.
Future medical expenses in the state of New Mexico, they can do an annuitized payout. They can do, basically it's an insurance policy, like a health insurance policy on a future payout. In Texas right now, it's still just all lump sum.
Oh, really? So when you work on these cases, how do you advise guys? What is your recommendation when they get these payouts, and how do they structure it?
So if they're if someone is getting a lump sum payout, a lot of that depends on how much they're receiving. I worked on a case here a couple of years ago. I can't talk about the specifics of the case. It's subject to confidentiality, but there was a young woman that recovered a very large settlement. I mean, we're talking about a life-changing amount of money, okay? And one of the things that we always advise people, and we sit down through several conversations and talk to them about this, is, don't make any decisions immediately. Decide to settle the case, but then short of that, sit down, take some time to take a breath, recover, don't make any plans for doing anything with the money, and don't tell anybody besides your spouse, maybe your kids, if you've got a very close family. Don't tell anybody that you have recovered a lot of money, because just like you mentioned earlier, it's human nature. You will discover so many relatives you never realized you had,
right?
So many good friends that wouldn't have known your name 6 weeks earlier. People will come with lots of them with great causes. They're very convincing. They're very sympathetic. Oh, my teenage child needs a kidney transplant, and
it's all
if
good
they don't
causes.
have a kidney transplant, they're going to die, and it just tears at your heartstrings.
Yeah, right.
And you can only that's why I always, when I was growing up, I thought it'd be fun to be Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or someone like that and be a multi-billionaire. But as I've gotten older, no, those guys have a rough life. They have got to have several layers of people insulating them.
Yeah,
from all those
that's the key. And
so we tell them to not tell anybody about that, and we get them set up with financial advisors. One of the things that we want them to do is consider putting a certain amount of the money aside in the form of annuities, which at that rate, if it's a personal injury case, if it's truly for physical injury, most of those will be, or essentially all of those will be tax-free annuities. Setting the money aside in a series of different annuities, looking at their long-term goals, trying to figure out what their goals are, whether their goals are to pay off debt. That's a big thing that we encourage. And we could talk about some of the financial advisors that are on that topic. But we advise them to, hey, pay off your credit cards, number one. Let's set aside enough money to pay off credit cards, because that's a huge interest rate. It's a huge, huge expense. Pay off medical bills that you have had, and many of them have had lots of medical bills. We work to negotiate those down. Then, pay off your house. Make sure that you're going to have a place to live long term that's going to be debt free. Then let's get you set up with, depending on what your plans are, depending on what your needs are, let's get you set up with a lifetime income stream.
Sure.
Let's make sure and provide for the people in your life that you need to provide for, your kids, your aging parents. Invest some of this money in things that are going to make it grow. Give some of the money away to causes that you support. Give away to your church. Give away to good charities, reputable charities, to be a good human being, be a good steward of wealth.
The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision.
Yeah, so you've unpacked this a lot, so I'm going to give you the X and O's of how we do windfalls or, payment of human capital reimbursements, however we need to frame that. And so we look at it a lot different, but we all come to the same conclusion, right? And so typically when we look at somebody that has some type of windfall, we look at it from a standpoint that, first of all, if you were sustaining your standard of living before the event, you can sustain your standard of living after the event. So let's carve out that amount of money. Let's put it to the side, whether it's $60,000 or $200,000 a year for that first year. And then let's put all the other money over here where it's still accessible, but it's very restricted, okay? And it could be in treasuries. It could be in some type of fixed income, typically, aspect or strategy. And what I've found out is that almost every single client that I've ever had, and we had one that was almost $14 million last year, is that first year is the spend syndrome is legit. And I was like, and I said, we're not going to pay off, we don't pay off the house. That's the one thing we don't do. And we're like, now we'll set aside that yearly's income to pay for the house into that account. We're going to put it in there, and we're going to say, don't let it burn a hole in your pocket for 1 year. Let's figure out what you're passionate about. Let's figure out and we go through a 6 to 12 week educational course. That is our biggest thing. And so being the type of planners we have it depending on the age of the kids, the age of the grandparents or the parents, and the beneficiary of the windfall. We go through a 6 to 12 week course on every single thing you can think of that there is inside of there. What's a stock? How does it work? What's a bond? How does it work, right? How do taxes apply for it? What's a passive investments, right? How does real estate work? That's the biggest one everybody tries to get into, right? And all of these things, and then we start building out their team. And that I think most people that gravitate towards the educational side of it first, they can ward off the other people that come, because they're all going to come. How quiet you can be, which is great advice. Don't tell a soul. And if you don't tell a soul and you don't have an advisor around you, the only thing you need to tell people is like, I don't handle my money. I have a guy that does. I'll get you in contact with them.
Right.
Right.
That's the designated person to say no.
That's exactly what that is. There's so many times where I get to enjoyingly, and sometimes to good and bad. There's some investments that they get presented with. I'm like, dang, that's a good investment, right? You might want to consider this one. But 9 times out of 10, it's like, this is not thought out. This is somebody asking for a handout, and they're not going to use it for the right purposes. But it's just slow down. Yeah. They think that because they've never had money and that all of a sudden they do, that it's going to burn a hole in their pocket and they're going to lose it tomorrow. So they got to do something with it because they're in that mindset. They've been trained for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years that I got to do something with it. I got to do something with it. No, you don't. And it's a very hard, and this is why most lottery winners go broke in the first 5 years, is because they feel like they have to do it, and they go buy a house, and they pay off their house, and they buy their mother a house, and they do all these things. But there's different ways to do it. You don't have to pay off the house, or the mother's house. What you have to do is create a risk-tolerant income stream to make the payments on the house and use effective tax planning and debt strategies to actually be able to make that payment for them. So I'm not an advocate of any solution. I'm not an advocate of annuities. I'm not an advocate of bonds or stocks or private placements. I'm just here going, everybody's got a different story. Let's figure out what works for you. Yeah. Let's figure out what your risk tolerance is. The only thing I really wholehearted is don't spend $1 for 6 months. We'll take your millions of dollars, carve out what it takes for you to live for 6 months, typically a year. And we're saying don't spend any in 6 months, period. Here's 6 months worth of income. Go enjoy life, right? Yeah. And get back to normal, get back to new, mend the wounds, right? And figure that out. Because it took my dad, it took me and my family, it took us a good year to go like, all of it's over. Like, what do we want to do? You know what I'm saying? And I think that's a great advice that you're giving there is like, hey, pay down debt, pay down credit cards. That's, the arbitrage event that you have between what you can make in interest compared to what credit card debt is virtually impossible to pay off. So if you got $15,000 in credit card debt that at 25%, you're not going to make that in the market in a bond. Go pay that off. That's 100%, right? Everything else that is low interest, right? Even a car payment, let's just carve that out and spend 6 months or a year to analyze whether we need to pay it off. Because 9 times out of 10, they pay it off, and guess what? They end up doing anyways. Go getting another vehicle, right? So why are they paying it off? They could just trade it in, before they pay it off a year from now. So,
confession time here. One of my guilty pleasures is whenever the lottery, the Mega Millions or the Powerball goes up into like the 9-figure area, I'll go down and buy a ticket. Put like $20 in. I know I'm not going to win, but just the
there's the lightning strike event that could happen.
Yeah,
right?
Well, it's more like a lightning strike while you're being eaten by a shark.
Why walking on water at the same time?
Yeah,
right?
But it could happen.
It could happen, right?
So
that's funny.
I'll go down and buy a ticket every now and then. But I've always joked to my friends and my family, you'll know if I win because you're going to call my cell phone number and it's going to be disconnected, and you're going to go, we haven't heard from him in like 6 weeks, or
we don't know if he's dead or not. Yeah,
and they're going to drive by my house, and there'll be a for sale sign sitting on the house, and I'll be just in the wind somewhere.
Yeah, right.
I'll just disappear. But I wrote a blog article here a couple of years ago about just exactly that. Okay, what are the steps to take if you win the lottery? If you buy a lottery ticket and you get the winning number on the lottery ticket.
All right, go. You got to tell me this because I want to compare and see if my theory is right as
okay.
yours.
So the first step is don't tell anybody.
Of course.
And that's like first, second, and third steps. Don't tell anybody, even though you're going to be excited. But the next step is take a picture of the winning ticket.
Front and back. Sign the back.
And then go take it down and put it in a safety deposit box.
But you got to leave enough room to endorse it to an entity.
Okay. Well, and
That's a big
where,
thing for me on there. It's like sign the ticket, leave enough room to endorse it to an entity, because 9 times out of 10, that's where it's going, to a trust or it's going into an entity.
Okay.
So that on the back, all right. So you take a Photoshop, send it to your wife. That's it, and then go put it in safety deposit box.
Well,
and then build your team.
You might not even want to send it to your wife, depending on how well your relationship's going.
Yeah, that's funny.
Maybe to hire a family law attorney, but yeah, then get your team assembled. You know, you're going to assemble a team with a couple of financial planners and a couple of attorneys and, you know, an accountant, and figure out exactly how you're going to structure this thing, how you're going to manage this thing before anybody knows. And like you said, I think you probably do want to assign it to an entity. And then we could talk about, you need to choose where that entity is incorporated. You know, maybe you want to incorporate it in a state that allows some anonymity.
Yeah.
Figure out a good state with low income taxes, with anonymity on corporate filers, and get a nest of corps and LLCs and limited partnerships, and
insulate it really well. Right?
Insulate it really well. Have some accounts set up in the Cayman Islands where they've got all sorts of tax treaties and things like that. And,
yeah, I can't endorse those anymore, but yeah, there's merit to them though. But
the bottom line is you're going to plan and plan and plan before anything is ever done
before you go to Austin
and
you go cash it in. That's the thing.
And then you're going to hire an attorney that's not even going to separate attorney outside of your other team that's not even going to know who you are, except to know that you're XYZ Corporation, and have the ticket couriered to them, and they're going to go to Austin and claim it and be the designated person that's going to show up on the newspaper.
Can you do that?
I bet you could. I don't know for sure, but I don't see why not.
I thought you actually had to claim it in person, because they have to have the photo, and they there's a lot. I know you can change your name, or you can hide your name inside there, but I thought you had to have the photo. I don't know. We got to look that one up.
We have to look that up and research that.
Yeah.
So here's another one that I always wanted to look up, and part of my dream plan, if I won the lottery sometime, would be to not just assign it to a corp, but to assign it to a 501c3.
Yeah, so
could you assign it to a nonprofit, and that way you don't end up paying any taxes on it, and you collect all of this money for the nonprofit, and then spend the rest of your life giving it away,
right?
In charity, and making other people's situations better. You know, solving problems for people, and bringing life-changing good to other people.
Yeah, and I think this is
That'd be fun.
It would, but this is why we're on the earth, and I truly believe this is to be a servant. And so when you're a servant inside of there, the money should be a tool. And when you acquire money to a certain degree, and I've been blessed where I feel like to a certain degree I've acquired enough money where I use it as a tool to be able to grow other things and teams around me and do some things. And I think everybody should have that opportunity to some degree, whether it's at a very small community level or on a national level or a global level, whatever it needs to be inside of there. But to unpack that of how we do it is we typically put everything into an entity, and then we change the share classes to be able to be owned by a trust. So it's the 99-1 GPLP structure, and then the trust owns the 99%. So the trust owns it. And then inside of there, we either create their own endowment or their own foundation, or we create a donor-advised fund. And we do it depending on the scale of it. And then the family members are the managers of that, and they get paid a salary out of it, so they get some income and benefit. And then now that we gave it all away, theoretically, now we have to have something to create a legacy. And this is where the Rockefellers did it really well. And you create a wealth replacement trust. And then you spill out a little bit of money to actually give to the next generation equivalent to what it was that you received. And it becomes perpetual. And so it's like, hey, I'm going to give everything, but I'm going to leak out enough to create the same legacy for the next generation, which is going to give everything again, leak out enough to create it for the next legacy. And that way, if one generation screws it up, then it resets for the next legacy through the wealth replacement trust. And so it doesn't matter if one generation screws it up. It's still there. And this is why the Rockefellers really have it set up where they're 9 deep and they are actually still growing, and there's not been a generation that actually destroys the family dynasty. And I think everybody should have at their own scale that same experience, so that if you get something, there's a way for you to enjoy a little of it, give a lot, and also create the legacy that you want. So what's wrong with that? Yeah. You get all 3 phases of it. You get to enjoy it. You get to give it away. You get to be a servant. You get to teach your children and the people around you to be a servant by managing that gift, but then they get their own gift so they can create their own legacy for the next generation. I think it's the perfect plan. That's my own personal feelings in it. It's what my kids are going to do. Is I told them that, and I told my wife, and I tell clients all day long, is I spent a lifetime creating my wealth. I'm going to spend every dollar the way I want to. And the last check I write isn't a bounce, and it's going to be to the funeral parlor, but I'm still going to leave the legacy I want to. Does that make sense?
That does.
And that's the cool thing to it. So we kind of gone through that side of it in there, as far as like the business side of it. So if somebody was going into from the financial side of it, they're looking at it from the legal side, how would they need to structure their way to communicate, like to you or to an attorney? Like you said, hey, it's immediately, right? But there's a lot of things that what's immediate, and they need to be certified, or they need to be licensed, or they need to have that specialty in the right format inside of there. So what's the things that they need to look at? I always say the first thing that people need to look at, whether they're in a distressed situation, like needing a personal injury, a will is the number one thing everybody should consider, like day one.
Absolutely.
If you're 18 years old, go get a will. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Because I've seen more problems. That guardianship case that we worked on, not me and you, but I worked on, that was $30 million. I mean, he was 14 years old, couldn't have a will. And so, but the parents didn't structure their stuff correctly, and nobody would have known this, where now they automatically have a guardianship. And so I think there's a hole in the industry, or in the Texas code, and I could be wrong on this, on how to structure where you don't get a guardianship placed upon you. I think that is the absolute worst thing you can have. It is so, after going through that, the ward, which is the individual that was awarded the benefit or the human capital replacement or the windfall, however you want to structure that. I agree with you. I don't think it should be called a windfall. I mean, he was 14, never had a proper life, could have, right, and had an explosion in his face, and was not had his entire life taken away from him, but was there. Does that make sense? Yeah. Until it was 38 years old.
And that's not a true windfall. That's not like winning.
That's not, no. That's, I mean, he lost his human capital. But my point is like, so the mom gave up her entire life to take care of him, did the best she could, but didn't have the right expertise around him, and ends up going, like, taking some poor advice, and then the state comes in and says, hey, we're going to take your guardianship away from you. And now he passes away during the COVID time. And now it's been 3 years, $30 million is sitting there, and you got an attorney in Houston, Texas, and you got a judge in Fort Worth that is still not giving the beneficiary the money back. It's still locked up, and they're still collecting fees off of it. I don't understand that.
That's amazing.
I still have a disagreement with it. I think that should have been disagreed or changed venues, whatever you could do on that side of the house to get it away from those two people, because all they're doing is just milking fees off of it. And so we started looking at it, and guess what? That Houston attorney, his biggest donor to that judge is the Houston attorney. So it's
there's a John Grisham book there.
Is there not? Right? It's crazy. And so I digress inside of it, but there's a lot of things that's bad on. So what I would say or ask is, like, the order of operations is simple, right? So get an attorney, get it fast, get your team on board. But on top of that is, what do they need to look for besides a will that you need to structure when an event happens? Do you photograph things that event happens? Like, what do you do?
Absolutely.
How do you document
Absolutely.
things right?
So I want to highlight real quick one thing that you said that's so important for everybody, not just for people that are involved in a legal case. And everybody needs a will. I do some simple wills at my firm, and I have people come in, friends, people in the community, past clients, that oftentimes will ask me to do wills for them. And they'll say, well, I don't have a will, and here I am 50 years old or 55 years old. And I ask them, why not? Because the only person who does not need a will is somebody that can promise me that they're not going to die.
Yeah.
And I don't care who you are or how important you are or how strong you are. Everybody that has ever walked this earth has died.
Sure.
That's something that you're never going to be able to escape. It's going to come for all of us. It's gonna happen someday. So, but people oftentimes will say, "Well, I don't have any assets." Well, yeah, you do. Everybody's got assets. You may not be aware of what it is. And it may not be very much. It may be very modest. Maybe you live a very simple life, but you still need a will. And quite often, the people that need the will the most are those that have a simple life. And in case in point, I was contacted a couple of years ago by two kids. They were like 22 and 17, who had lost their mom. Very tragic story. They'd lost their mom. She had brain cancer. She had passed away. Single mom. She had raised them, and now the older daughter is raising the younger daughter. And they have a check. Their mom had a savings account. And in the savings account, it was like $3,000. And so the bank gives them a check made out to the estate of
Right.
for $3,000. And they come in to see me. We need this money. This for us, this is going to help us to be able to pay rent for 3 or 4 months. This is going to be able to help buy groceries and pay the light bill. And it's only like $3,000 or $4,000. Well, did your mom have a will? Well, no. She didn't have a will.
So now it goes to probate. And there's something to do
So
about it.
now even a will would go to probate, but now it goes to not just probate, but it goes into an heirship action and has to go through an intestate administration. And that's a lot more expensive than probating a will. And so you're looking at, $3,000. Okay, we can handle that. We can help with that. How much is it going to cost? About $4,000.
Yeah.
And they said,
The cost of
help us
probate and
understand
going
the math
through it.
here.
Yeah.
How does that work? And I said, it doesn't. It doesn't make good business sense.
No.
When you've got a small amount of assets, you look at the depletion of those assets going through an intestacy, and then you've got the fact that the state chooses where your property goes, and none of us want that.
No.
You've got people that have to be located, and it's a mess. So everybody needs a will.
Right.
Get a simple will. That's the bottom line. But to get back to your question, you said,
Well, hold on. I want to add into that one deal. So inside of the will, one of the things that we see a lot of problems from is the new HIPAA guidelines. And so most wills now have the HIPAA release form that gives control whether if you want to change it from this hospital to this hospital, if somebody needs a guardianship, like if your spouse or your mother or something like that, somebody has guardianship over you. And that HIPAA release forms allows you. And my old business partner, his dad, and thank God he had it. And when he had Alzheimer's, they were not giving him the care he wanted. And so he just slapped that down and said, I have control. I'm taking him out of this institution and I'm taking him over here, getting ready. And we're going in the next 6 hours. And that's kind of how it was. If he didn't have that document, then he would have had to gone back through the court system. It would have been delayed process. So I think there's multiple pull the plug documents typically in a will, right?
and those are separate from a will.
They are, but
important
it's
to keep
all,
them separate.
yeah. There's usually 3 to 5 documents that goes into them,
Right.
But typically most, and I would assume that a lot of your documents have the pull the plug document, they have the HIPAA release, and that has some of the things inside.
Brandon, that's such a bad terminology. Pull the plug document.
Yeah, it is a horrible.
In the legal field, we like to call that a living will or a directive to physicians.
Yeah, there you go, directive to physicians. That's what it's. But
yeah, that's a
but
whole
most
package.
people go there. Yeah, that's the whole package.
And those things are important to do. They're equally, maybe even more important, just for the reasons that you mentioned. To do those sorts of things. Powers of attorney, medical powers of attorney.
Business power attorneys.
Business power of attorney.
Yeah.
Part of an entire suite of documents, if you will. Mm-hmm. But they're not within the actual will and testament. And here's one place that's important. Because people have this idea that they've been watching too much Hollywood, that there's some sort of a magical reading of the will where all of the family gathers and the will is read and, and people are either clapping or insulted. And no, that doesn't ever happen. So when you have a will, that's something that's only going to be probated by the attorneys 6 months maybe after your death. So sometimes people will say, "Oh, well, I really want to be buried at this particular cemetery. I really want to be cremated," or "No, I never want to be cremated," or "I want to be buried in wearing this particular type of suit," and they'll want to put that in their will. And I'm like, no, time out. That doesn't go in the will, because by the time the will is opened up and even addressed, it's long after you have passed and long after the funeral is over. You need to communicate that sort of thing to your family members, to your loved ones, so that they can put that into effect. But
we do it as a letter prior to, here's a letter to the family. And so a lot of our wills that we suggest with attorneys and we suggest with our clients is, the other one that's the biggest one is if you contest the will. And so we highly encourage a lot of our clients, especially business owners and high net worth clients, that if you contest the will, you're cut out of the will. Right. And so it's one of those things, as long as we feel like the family member or the person that creating the will is cognitive and is doing it in sound mind, which 99.9% of all wills and documents out there are always done with that. And there's, again, that's too much TV where they're, that's contested because somebody's not in the sound mind to actually be executing their will. But with that being aside, it's always I've seen, especially business owners, man, it's because somebody's got to run that business when somebody's gone. And it is a lot of business owners do not get the buy-sell agreement put in place. They do not get who's going to run the business, who's going to sit on the board, who's going to make those decisions. And sometimes a lot of times, it's not the spouse. The spouse typically is running the household or they're doing their own business. They have no clue how to run business A when they're running business B, right? And they have no clue when they're at home taking care of the kids how to do these things. And a lot of them, like in your field, there's licensing that you have to be, there's certifications or there's MSAs or things like that you have to adhere to even do that. So there could be enterprise value lost by not having a buy-sell agreement in place. And so, and having that succession plan put in there. So I think one of the criteria is when there is some type of life event, whether it's death or disability or malpractice or a legal lawsuit that's brought because of a damage, I think you need to consider everything beforehand. And what's the fun part for me in my career is when people set it up correctly in the front end, when they're not distressed, when they're sound-minded, not emotionally compromised, that their thinking and their process is so easy and fluid. And then in those 12, 13 cases that I've had in my 15 years, that an event happens, it's the surviving's family and spouse goes, it's just kind of like a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
We've thought about these things. We've had conversations. We know what the planning is. And all I have to do is renew their mind into, hey, we talked about this. This is what you want. This is what he wanted. This is what she wanted. Has anything changed here? Sometimes there is slight changes, but we have to make sure everything's still, the integrity of the thing changes, and it makes everything just so much fluid. So, the prepared seems to have it a lot easier than the unprepared in a lot of cases that I've experienced.
Absolutely. And when you're trying to get people to prepare like that, what is that you always hate to hear? Oh, that's never going to happen.
I shut that down really quick.
Yeah, famous last words. As attorneys, and probably you as in the financial industry, we plan for that worst case scenario. We like to leave no stone unturned.
Right.
We like to consider every possible contingency. What's going to happen if you're hit by lightning while you're being eaten by a shark, type of thing.
Yeah. It's don't plan to fail. Is just failing to plan.
That's right.
And so we always get that covered early on as much as possible. I think that sentiment's changed a lot, though. I get less and less. I haven't had that pushback in a long time. I don't know if the way that we do the process of planning, because on the front end, it's like, hey, we're going to uncover every stone. We're going to do all these things for you and make sure everything, as best as our ability, is done. So they don't have that question that comes to it because it's just a process. It's a rhythm. It's a dance that we're going through every single year. And we have different narratives, whether it's, death, disability, wills, trusts, succession planning. And so they know they're going through this. And that's why we have a 3-year financial plan and not a 1-year financial plan, is because they know they're going through this rhythm with us over the next 3 years. And we're going to uncover everything from most important to the smallest details. Things that if they would have had that as a beneficiary onto that $3,000, savings account.
Right.
It would have been transferred to them immediately, and they wouldn't have had to gone through probate. They already had assets, the custody of those assets.
And do you think that's something that has changed in the dialogue that we see with the people that we serve because of COVID? Because who would have, 2019, what if we have a worldwide pandemic?
Right.
Oh, that's never going to happen.
Right.
Suddenly we know it does.
I don't know if it was there or if it's been the last decade with now information is online like a podcast where people are fed snippets of information where it's like, oh, that's I think it's a combination, to be honest with you. I will tell you that COVID has accelerated the knowledge of the consumer for every possibility because we were locked in our houses or, locked up for a year, where a lot of us have gotten used to consuming information digitally and not having to go actually sit down with an expert. And so they're more educated when they come in, is my point. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, which is a good thing because they know they have a need. It's also a bad thing because they only get the highlights of what the rules and laws are, and they think they're an attorney or they think they're a financial planner, and they think that, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like everybody's a doctor now that WebMD's out.
Right.
Does that make sense? And so I will tell you and this is one of the most appalling things I think I've seen as a financial planner happen. There's a massive, well-known financial wellness guy that has screamed for the last decade that just popped off on one of his podcast shows that the safe withdrawal rate was 8 to 12% in retirement. And I think it's tens of thousands of financial planners have just absolutely destroyed him for those comments inside of there because of it's just, there's so much information out. Just because it's information doesn't mean it's good information.
Right.
Does that make sense? And so I think everybody needs to take everything with a grain of salt, including this podcast. We have a lot of, things that we come across because we're sitting across from each other that are meant to be a joke, but sometimes when they're viewed from a third angle, it looks like they're being serious when it's not, right? I think that happens to a lot of things. And in his case, he was not joking. He literally talked about taking some of his own content down because it said the safe withdrawal rate was 3 to 5%. So I think it was a lapse of judgment. I think a lot of the things he does is good. But my point being is information's deadly if it's consumed in the wrong environment and taken as, the Bible and everything's absolute there. I think
taken out of context.
Taken out of context, right? There's no absolute. And I think everybody has their own deals. But hey, I got another question for you because you mentioned this in the passing. You do a lot of immigration law too, don't you?
That's absolutely right. And I was hoping you would bring that up. We have a new immigration bill. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No,
that's
I'm
been
not.
proposed in Texas that is very controversial. But I do handle a lot of immigration law. I started handling immigration law about 12 years ago because I saw a lot of my personal injury clients had immigration issues, they had problems, and there was no one here in this area that I felt comfortable referring them to. Not a lot of attorneys do immigration law. It's kind of a niche specialty. So I went out and became competent in immigration law, educated myself about immigration law to be able to help the clients that needed help. So I for the last decade and a half, I've been doing immigration law, family-based sponsorships, fiance visas, spousal visas, naturalization, things of that nature. So I've watched some of the changes that have taken place in immigration law.
We just came back from the Tax Institute, which we go to every year, and one of the biggest, and this is, it was so much fun. They put us at the DFW Hyatt in the basement, so we didn't see light for 4 days. And this is like, hey, let's just keep these, planners and tax attorneys and CPAs all down in this basement for 4 days. But it was very interesting. And one of them, it was just Supreme Court law after Supreme Court law after Supreme Court law, which, I mean, sounds boring, but, if you do this for a career and you have a passion for it, it's actually very interesting. And so one of them was they call it an F-bar, and I might have said that wrong. I got to double check it. But what it is talking about having foreign accounts when you're a U.S. and you become a U.S. citizen. As they went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they literally hit this guy because he was a U.S. citizen, came over here, went back to Europe, started a business in Europe, had like a dual citizenship there, came back to the United States and goes, oh, you didn't register your bank accounts in Europe over in the United States, so we're going to hit you with a $100,000 fine per year per account. And he had something like $5.7 million worth of fines. And so he took it all the way to the Supreme Court. And so what my point being is, if you are and you go through that process to be a U.S. citizen, look at it from multiple facets. Don't look at it from, hey, am I allowed to be in the United States? But look at it from how your assets are held in what country, and making sure you're following the law of the country that you're actually associating with. And I think that's a good point. But he actually won the lawsuit, and they claimed that he owned it per account per year instead of on the form, because the form said it wrong. And they went back. This is the interesting thing from the Supreme Court that's really dramatically affected the Supreme Court. Affected the IRS, is they issued, instead of a public acknowledgement, where they go out there and say, hey, we're going to put this tax law out for the public to vote on, to review, to post comments on, we're just going to give you a notice. And the Supreme Court knocked that down. And so every single notice that the IRS has ever given out has been case law within months of the first one hitting. The second one was upheld. The third one was upheld in these different jurisdictions and across the board. And there's a lot of IRS case law now that is fixing to just implode for just only giving notices and not giving the ability for the public to actually weigh in on that. And I'm a huge advocate of that. I'm not a fan of the IRS, and now I'm going to be audited 12 times. I appreciate you coming. That's great. How do people get a hold of you? I know we're getting close to our time frame here. If they need to visit with you or would like to visit with you, what's a good way for a lot of people to reach out to you?
Yeah, I appreciate the plug. If anybody wants to contact me, they can call my phone. We still have phones in this age. We still answer our phones at 806-771-7900. Or they can find us on the web at hoganlaw.com.
And you service Texas, Colorado,
and New Mexico.
Rob, I appreciate you coming on the show.
Brandon, thanks for having me.
Love it. Talk to you soon.